All right, we'll go ahead and do all of number 13 at once, solving these, but they're all just x squared equals a number. So really what this problem is doing is it's getting you to practice simplifying radicals. So if x squared equals 150, then x equals plus or minus the square root of 150. And so we need to figure out how to simplify that, which means we need to split that 150 up into smaller chunks of change. So I know that 150 can be written as 50 times 3, because 5 times 3 is 15. So these should all still be plus or minuses. I know that 50 can be written as 5 times 2. That's so not even remotely true what I just said. 50 can be written as 25 times 2. So 25 times 2 is 50, and then 50 times 3 is 150. So I've split this number up like that, which is useful because now I can pull out the square root of 25, which is 5. So I get plus or minus 5 times the square root of 2 times 3 is 6. You can't break that down anymore. So this would be a simplified radical form of the square root of 150. The answer key doesn't say plus or minus, but it should. So let's go ahead and do B as well. The only thing slightly tricksy about B is that it is a negative. So I get x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 25. But all that means is that x equals plus or minus the square root of positive 25 times the imaginary unit I. So just take the normal square root, so we get plus or minus 5i as the solution. Z there. Don't let negatives throw you off. Doesn't mean anything. Just means you need to pull the negative out by writing an I at the end. So let's go with C. X squared equals 63 means that x equals plus or minus the square root of 63. And let's see if we can break the square root of 63 up. Well, I do believe that 63 is divisible by 3. So let's figure out what that is. 63 divided by 3. Well, 3 goes into 6 2 times, and it gets you 6. So drop that 3 down. 3 goes into 3 1 time, so 21 goes into 63 3 times. So we get, erase that stuff, we get x equals plus or minus the square root of 3 times 21. And 21 is 7 times 3, so I get plus or minus the square root of 3 times 3 times 7, which means plus or minus the square root of 9 times 7, so I can pull out that 9. I probably should have just divided by 9 in the beginning, but anyways, pull out that 9 by taking the square root of it, so plus or minus 3 root 7 should be that radical simplified. Answer key doesn't say plus or minus maybe, but it should. All right, D, square root of 140. Let's split it up. So gives us x equals plus or minus square root of 140. 140 is divisible by 7d. X equals plus or minus the square root of 70 times 2. Keep going, divide that by 2 as well. X equals plus or minus the square root of 70 is 35 times 2. And then I still have that times 2. So there we have that, which means since I have a 2 times 2, I could pull that 2 out. So I have plus or minus 2 root 35. Do you see what I did there? Check it, make sure you see that. And then can you simplify square root of 35 at all? Well, 35 is 5 times 7, and those are not squares, so you can't really do anything with that. So I would leave that as my final answer right there. Again, answer key doesn't say plus or minus, but it should. All of these should be plus or minus. So, red one, if x squared equals negative 4, then x equals the positive or negative square root of negative 4, which means x equals plus or minus 2i. Pull the negative out by appending the I, and then square root of 4 is 2. So plus or minus 2i for E right here. Very similar here, square root both sides. So then x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 16, which means x equals plus or minus the square root of positive 16 is 4, so the square root of negative 16 is 4i right there. So plus or minus 4i. Just a couple more here. 200, how do we split it up? Well, so let's say x equals plus or minus the square root of 200. And I can divide 200 by a bunch of things. So let's break it up however you want to. Let's divide it by 4. If I divide it by 4, then I get plus or minus the square root of 4 times 50. 5 times 4 is 20, so 50 times 4 is 200. Let's keep going. X equals plus or minus 2 root 50, right? And then can you break 50 down? Why, yes, you can. Plus or minus 2 root 50 is the same as 25 times 2, which means I can now pull out a multiple of 5. So plus or minus, pull that 25 out by square rooting it. So we get 5 times 2 is 10 times the square root of 2 would be that simplified radical right there. All right, just a couple more here, and they will be quick. X squared equals negative 36 means x equals plus or minus the square root of positive 36i. Took that negative out, so I get plus or minus 6i for the square root of negative 36, and that agrees with the answer key. So we will do our last one. But look, x squared equals negative 63. We've already done x squared equals positive 63, and we got plus or minus 3 root 7, which means the negative version is just going to be x equals, that should be an arrow, x equals plus or minus 3 root 7, but since it's negative, we need an I at the end for the imaginary unit. So that would be our solution set right there. Simplifying radicals, need to know how to do that without a calculator. Simplifying square roots of negative numbers, need to know that you're really just pulling out the I and then taking the square root of the positive number. So there you go.